In the quiet town of Danforth, Massachusetts, whispers of the Fenwick family's legacy carried like ghostly echoes through the cobblestone streets. The Fenwick estate, an imposing Gothic structure surrounded by dense woods, had stood untouched for generations. With its spired rooflines and ivy-covered walls, it seemed like something pulled from a dark Victorian novel. Few dared venture too close, not out of fear of trespassing laws, but because of the sinister reputation that clung to the family like a second skin. To outsiders, the Fenwicks appeared to be a wealthy, reclusive lineage with old money and ancient ties to the town's founding. But for those who lived in Danforth, the truth was darker. The Fenwick family wasn't just wealthy, they were powerful, and that power didn't come from honest business. It came from secrets. Over 3 generations, they had built a quiet empire of blackmail, extracting wealth and favors from anyone with something to hide. Origins of a dark dynasty. It all began with Edmund Fenwick in the 1920s, a cunning man with a talent for digging into people's lives. Edmund's approach was subtle and calculated. He had a knack for turning up scandals, extramarital affairs, hidden debts, political corruption, and using them to his advantage. His targets were carefully chosen, people with enough wealth and influence to make the risks worth it, but not powerful enough to crush him outright. Edmund didn't work alone. His wife Lillian was equally ruthless, playing the role of the elegant hostess while subtly prying into the lives of their guests. Together, they formed a formidable duo, and by the time they passed their legacy to their children, the Fenwick family was not just feared but respected in a way that no one dared to challenge. Their children, Margot and Thomas Fenwick, inherited not just their wealth but their methods. Margot was a strategist, cold and brilliant, while Thomas was the muscle, ensuring that those who didn't comply with their demands faced consequences. Over time, they refined the family business, turning blackmail into an art form. By the time Vincent Fenwick, Margot's son, took over in the 2000s, the family's operations were well-oiled and precise. But the world had changed. Secrets no longer lived in locked drawers or whispered conversations. They lived in the digital ether. Vincent, recognizing the shift, brought in new blood. Hackers, private investigators, and social engineers who could exploit the digital age. Yet, despite their modernization, Vincent knew the family was walking a thin line. The more they expanded, the more they risked exposure. A new threat emerges. It was a crisp autumn evening when Vincent received the first sign of trouble. Sitting in his study, surrounded by leather-bound tomes and the scent of aged wood, he was reviewing a dossier on a potential target, a tech entrepreneur named Gerald Stokes. Stokes had secrets worth millions, and the Fenwicks were ready to collect. But something felt off. Stokes had recently hired a private security firm known for its discretion and ruthlessness. Vincent leaned back in his chair, tapping a finger against the edge of the dossier. Why would a man like Stokes suddenly ramp up his security? He murmured. Before he could delve deeper, there was a knock at the door. Evelyn Fenwick, his cousin and the family's lead tech strategist, entered, her face drawn with concern. "We have a problem," she said, holding up her phone. "Stokes didn't just hire security. He's been making quiet inquiries into our family. Someone tipped him off." Vincent's eyes narrowed. "Tipped him off? How?" Evelyn shrugged. "Don't know yet. But if he's digging, we need to act fast." Vincent rose, pacing the room. "We can't let this spiral. If Stokes finds anything, it could expose us." Evelyn nodded. "I'll handle the digital side, but we need Thomas to handle things the old-fashioned way." Escalation. That night, Thomas Fenwick, now in his late 40s but still a formidable presence, drove to Stokes's estate. Thomas was known for his quiet efficiency. He didn't leave trails, only warnings. But as he approached the gates, he noticed something unusual: extra guards patrolling the perimeter. Interesting, Thomas muttered to himself. He parked his car a safe distance away and watched through binoculars. Stokes was clearly expecting trouble. But from whom? As Thomas observed, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Evelyn. "Something's not right. Pull back." Thomas frowned but trusted Evelyn's instincts. He started the car and began to drive away when he noticed a figure in the distance, standing under a streetlight. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched him drive past. The first warning. The next morning, Vincent found a plain envelope slipped under the front door of the Fenwick estate. Inside was a single piece of paper with a chilling message typed in bold letters. "You're not the only ones who know how to play this game." Vincent's hand tightened around the note, his mind racing. Who could have sent this? Someone who knew their methods intimately. Someone who had studied them long enough to understand how they operated. He called an emergency meeting with Evelyn and Thomas. "This isn't just about Stokes anymore," Vincent said, slamming the note onto the table. "Someone's coming after us. Someone who knows how we work." Evelyn scanned the note, her expression unreadable. "We need to trace this. Whoever sent it isn't just a threat. They're sending a message." Thomas leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "If they know our methods, it means they've been watching us for a while. This could be someone we crossed in the past." Or, Evelyn added, it could be someone with a personal vendetta. Vincent's mind whirled with possibilities. They had made countless enemies over the years: politicians, businessmen, even other criminals. Any one of them could be behind this. But there was something about the note that felt different. This wasn't just a warning, it was a challenge. "We need to act fast," Vincent said. "Evelyn, dig into our digital records. See if there's been any unusual activity. Thomas, keep an eye on Stokes. If he makes a move, I want to know about it." "And what about the note?" Evelyn asked. Vincent stared at the ominous message for a long moment before replying, "We find out who sent it. And we end this. Permanently." The Fenwick estate felt colder than usual, as if the ominous message had seeped into the walls. Vincent couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was at play, something more dangerous than a mere rival blackmailer. He stood in the grand hall, staring at the family portrait that hung above the fireplace. Edmund Fenwick's cold eyes seemed to follow him, as if to remind him of the responsibility he bore. Evelyn had retreated to the family's underground tech room, a fortified space beneath the estate where the digital side of their empire was managed. The room was filled with screens, servers humming softly in the background. She was typing furiously, sifting through mountains of data. "Anything?" Vincent asked as he entered, the tension in his voice unmistakable. Evelyn didn't look up. "Someone's been poking around in places they shouldn't. I found traces of an intrusion attempt on our offshore accounts." She paused, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard. "But it's strange. Whoever did this wasn't trying to steal anything. They were just looking." "Looking for what?" Vincent demanded. "Leverage, maybe. Or information to use against us." Evelyn finally looked at him, her eyes sharp. "But they're good, Vince. Really good. This isn't some amateur hacker or disgruntled target. This is someone who knows exactly what they're doing." Vincent ran a hand through his hair. "If they're this good, why leave a message at our door? Why not just expose us?" Evelyn shrugged. "They're playing a game. They want us to know they're watching." "Well, they've got our attention," Vincent muttered. "Keep digging. We need to know who we're dealing with." A mysterious ally or foe? Meanwhile, Thomas was tailing Gerald Stokes. The tech CEO had been unusually quiet since hiring his private security team, but Thomas knew better than to assume that meant he had given up. People like Stokes didn't back down, they just found smarter ways to fight. As he followed Stokes through the bustling streets of Boston, Thomas noticed something odd. Another car was trailing Stokes's vehicle, keeping a discreet distance. Whoever was driving was a professional, smooth, deliberate, and careful not to attract attention. Thomas's instincts kicked in. He kept his distance, watching the second car closely. After a few blocks, Stokes's car pulled into an underground parking garage. The second car hesitated before following. Thomas parked nearby and slipped into the shadows. Inside the garage, Stokes emerged from his car, flanked by two bodyguards. The driver of the second car, a tall man in a dark coat, approached cautiously. Thomas crept closer, straining to hear their conversation. "You have something for me?" Stokes asked, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. The man in the coat handed over a slim envelope. "Everything you need is in there, but be careful. The Fenwicks are dangerous people." Stokes nodded. "That's exactly why I'm paying you." Thomas felt a surge of anger. Whoever this man was, he had information, potentially damaging information, about the Fenwick family. He debated intervening but decided against it. It was better to let the exchange happen and follow the man afterward. As Stokes and his guards walked away, Thomas focused on the man in the coat. He waited until the man returned to his car, then quietly followed him out of the garage. A deadly warning. Back at the estate, Evelyn was making progress. She had traced the digital intrusions to a private server located overseas, but every attempt to breach it was met with sophisticated countermeasures. Frustrated, she leaned back in her chair, thinking. Suddenly, an alert popped up on her screen. It was a live security feed from the estate's front gate. A black SUV had pulled up, and two men in suits stepped out, carrying a package. "Evelyn, what's going on?" Vincent's voice crackled over the intercom. "Uninvited guests," Evelyn replied. "They just dropped something at the gate." Vincent didn't waste time. He grabbed his coat and headed outside, meeting Thomas, who had just returned from Boston. "What happened?" Thomas asked, noticing Vincent's tense expression. "Someone left us a gift," Vincent muttered, gesturing toward the package lying on the ground. Thomas examined it carefully. It was a plain box, sealed with tape. "Could be a trap," he said cautiously. Vincent nodded. "Get it checked." Minutes later, the package was inside the estate, being scanned for explosives or toxins. Once cleared, Vincent carefully opened it. Inside was a single USB drive and a note. "This is just the beginning. You don't control all the secrets." Vincent's grip tightened around the note. "They're toying with us." Evelyn inserted the USB into an isolated computer, ensuring it couldn't access any of their internal systems. The drive contained a single video file. She clicked play, and the screen flickered to life. The video showed a dimly lit room. In the center was a chair, and tied to it was a man, bloody, beaten, and barely conscious. Vincent recognized him immediately. It was one of their former operatives, a man who had disappeared months ago during an operation overseas. A masked figure stepped into view, speaking directly to the camera. "Fenwicks, you've played this game for too long. You thought no one could touch you, but every empire falls, and yours begins to crumble today." The video ended abruptly. Silence hung in the room as the gravity of the situation sank in. "Retaliation. We can't let this slide," Thomas said, his voice cold and hard. "Whoever they are, they've declared war." Vincent nodded slowly. "Agreed. But we can't act blindly. We need more information before we make a move." Evelyn looked up from her computer. "I'm working on tracing the video's origin, but it's going to take time. They covered their tracks well. Time isn't something we have, Thomas growled. If they hit us again before we're ready, it could be fatal. Vincent considered their options. The Fenwicks had faced threats before, but this was different. Their enemy was organized, intelligent, and ruthless. They couldn't afford to underestimate them. Fine, Vincent said at last. We'll prepare for a counterstrike. But we do it smart. Evelyn, keep digging. Thomas, double our security. And keep an eye on Stokes. He might still be useful. As they dispersed, Vincent stood alone in the study, staring once again at the family portrait. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of the Fenwick legacy pressing down on him. They had built their empire on secrets, but now those secrets were turning against them. And he had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. The tension in the Fenwick estate was palpable. Every creak of the old floorboards, every rustle of wind against the windows seemed to carry an unspoken threat. Vincent knew that if they didn't act soon, the family's empire would collapse under the weight of its own secrets. Evelyn had been working tirelessly in the underground tech room, her eyes red from lack of sleep. She was running a trace on the video's origin while simultaneously monitoring external threats. Thomas, on the other hand, had doubled the security around the estate, positioning guards at key entry points and installing additional surveillance cameras. Vincent, however, wasn't convinced that brute force would be enough. Their enemy was clever, methodical, and always a step ahead. They needed to outthink whoever was behind the attacks, and they needed leverage of their own. An unexpected lead. Got something, Evelyn said suddenly, breaking the heavy silence in the room. Vincent and Thomas rushed over, peering at the screen. The video was routed through multiple servers to mask its origin, but I managed to trace it back to one location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Boston. Could be a trap, Thomas muttered. Probably, Evelyn agreed. But it's the only lead we've got. Vincent's mind raced. They couldn't afford to walk into an ambush, but neither could they ignore the lead. We'll go in carefully, he said at last. Thomas, assemble a team. Evelyn, stay here and keep monitoring. If anything goes wrong, you'll be our eyes and ears. The warehouse. Later that night, Vincent, Thomas, and a small team of trusted enforcers arrived at the warehouse. The air was damp and heavy with the scent of rust and decay. Shadows loomed large as the group moved quietly through the building, weapons drawn. Clear, one of the enforcers whispered after checking a side corridor. Vincent's pulse quickened as they approached the central area. The warehouse was mostly empty, save for a single table in the middle of the room. On it lay another envelope, identical to the one left at the estate. Thomas picked it up and handed it to Vincent. Inside was a photograph of Gerald Stokes, bound and gagged, with a message scrawled in red ink. Time's up. Meet us, or he dies. Vincent cursed under his breath. They want a face-to-face. Where? Thomas asked, his voice low and dangerous. Vincent turned the photo over. On the back was an address, an upscale hotel in downtown Boston. This ends tonight, he said grimly. The confrontation. The Fenwicks weren't ones to negotiate, but Vincent knew they had little choice. If they refused the meeting, Stokes would be killed, and more importantly, their enemy would keep the upper hand. They arrived at the hotel shortly before midnight, entering through a back entrance to avoid drawing attention. A message awaited them at the front desk. Room 1408. Come alone. Vincent glanced at Thomas, who gave a reluctant nod. I'll be close, Thomas said. If anything happens, I'll be there in seconds. Taking a deep breath, Vincent made his way to the designated room. The hallway was eerily quiet, and each step echoed ominously off the polished floors. He reached room 1408 and hesitated briefly before knocking. The door opened slowly, revealing a dimly lit suite. Inside, two figures stood by the window. One of them was Stokes, tied to a chair, his eyes wide with fear. The other was a man Vincent didn't recognize, tall, lean, and with an air of quiet menace. "Mr. Fenwick," the man said with a faint smile, "I've been expecting you." Unmasking the enemy, Vincent stepped inside, keeping his expression neutral. "You've gone through a lot of trouble to get my attention. Who are you?" The man chuckled. "Let's just say I'm someone who knows what it's like to live in the shadows. Someone who's tired of the Fenwicks holding all the cards." "Revenge, then?" Vincent asked, his voice calm despite the tension in the room. "Not quite. Justice." The man walked over to Stokes, placing a hand on the businessman's shoulder. "You see, for years your family has profited off the misery of others. You've built an empire on blackmail and fear. But empires fall, Mr. Fenwick, and yours is long overdue." Vincent's mind raced as he tried to piece together who this man was. He spoke with the bitterness of someone who had been wronged personally, but there was also a cold, calculated edge to him. "What do you want?" Vincent asked finally. "Simple. I want the Fenwick family to disappear. No more blackmail, no more extortion. You walk away from it all, or I release everything I have, every secret, every scandal your family has ever exploited." A dangerous gamble. Vincent knew that if the man was telling the truth, he had the power to destroy them. But he also knew that walking away wasn't an option. The Fenwick legacy wasn't just a business, it was their identity, their lifeblood. "You're bluffing," Vincent said, calling the man's gamble. "If you had that kind of information, you would have used it already." The man smiled again, this time more coldly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I wanted to give you one last chance to do the right thing." Before Vincent could respond, there was a sudden crash as the door burst open. Thomas and the enforcers stormed in, weapons raised. In the chaos, the man lunged for Stokes, holding a knife to his throat. "Back off, or he dies," the man shouted. Vincent raised a hand, signaling Thomas to hold his fire. "We don't need to do this," he said calmly. "Let Stokes go, and we can talk." The man hesitated, glancing between Vincent and the armed enforcers. For a moment, it seemed like he might surrender, but then, with a look of grim determination, he pressed the knife harder against Stokes's throat. Thomas moved like a shadow, faster than anyone expected. In one swift motion, he disarmed the man and pinned him to the ground. The knife clattered to the floor and Stokes gasped in relief. "It's over," Thomas said, his voice cold. The end of the line. Back at the estate, Vincent sat alone in the study, reflecting on the night's events. The man had been taken into custody, but he refused to give his real name or reveal who he was working with. Despite the victory, Vincent knew this wasn't truly over. "We need to change," Evelyn said quietly, standing in the doorway. "We can't keep doing things the old way. Sooner or later, someone else will come after us." Vincent nodded slowly. "You're right. It's time we evolved." For the first time in generations, the Fenwick family was at a crossroads. Their legacy of blackmail and extortion had brought them power, but it had also painted a target on their backs. If they wanted to survive, they would have to adapt, or risk being destroyed by the very secrets they once controlled. As Vincent stared into the flickering flames of the fireplace, he knew one thing for certain. The game had changed, and the Fenwicks would need to change with it. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more stories like this, hit that like button and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And let me know on which topic you would like to see stories next. And check out these other stories you might enjoy. See you in the next one. Till then, take care and goodbye.